Anakin Skywalker woke every night with the same image burning behind his eyelids. Like a scar the Force insisted on rekindling, and each awakening brought with it a thread of panic that coiled around his chest until it nearly suffocated him. For he saw Padmé's certain death happening during childbirth. This placed him before an abyss against which his Jedi training seemed useless, and in the gray dawn of Coruscant, he understood that hiding it any longer would lead him to worse choices. So he made a decision that wasn't in the manuals, nor in the calm words of the Masters, because he decided to seek out Mace Windu before looking for Yoda, like someone seeking action when they know they'll need a blade and not a bomb. In the silent corridor of the temple, the sound of Anakin's footsteps seemed to echo louder than they should, as if the very architecture judged his anxiety. And when he presented himself at Windu's quarters, he was received by a look that measured, weighed, and already condemned any evasiveness, because Mace didn't waste words on the obvious and didn't accept half-truths, and Anakin felt his hands tremble, but kept his chin firm, saying he needed to speak about something urgent and intimate. And Windu, opening passage, responded only, "Come in, Skywalker, and be clear." And that cold invitation, without the perfume of compassion, curiously was what gave him courage to continue. "I've been having visions," said Anakin, and the word visions hung in the air like dust illuminated by blades of sunlight. "They return every night, always the same scene. Someone very important to me dies during childbirth, and I stand there, useless, as if the Force were showing me a truth without giving me the hands to change it." And Windu, without moving a muscle, responded with the tone of one evaluating a battlefield. "Visions can be warnings or traps, Skywalker, and both require discipline so they don't become chains. So say what you haven't yet said, and say it completely, because half a fear produces a complete fall." Anakin swallowed the impulse to reveal the name burning on his tongue and turned his gaze to the window, where Coruscant's traffic lines scratched the sky like the veins of a living creature, and spoke. "I can't say who it is, Master, but it's not a whim of mine. It's not just attachment. It's someone whose life defines mine, and I cannot accept that the Force presents me this death as destiny." And Windu narrowed his eyes, a minimal gesture that, in him, equaled a storm, and responded, "You're asking me for action, not consolation, and from that I don't run. But know that each step we take will have a cost, including that of your own image before the Council." "I accept the cost," replied Anakin, with the hoarse voice of one who had already spent tears before arriving there. "I accept, if there's a real chance to prevent what I saw, because I can't bear the idea of crossing my arms and watching the end of everything that makes me fight." And Windu, walking 2 steps in his direction like one who shortens the distance to leave no space for lies, said, "Then listen carefully, Skywalker, because I'm going to speak to you with the frankness you came seeking, and it cuts, and sometimes it bleeds. If the Force showed you this, there's an origin. And if there's an origin, we can track it. And if we can track it, perhaps we can prevent it. But you'll need to obey me as generals would obey orders on the front." Anakin nodded immediately, seized by the rare sensation that, for the first time, he wouldn't be treated as a dangerous boy nor as an uncontrolled prodigy, but as a warrior who brings an objective problem, and asked, trying to maintain focus, "What's the first step, Master?" And Windu responded dryly, "Vigilance and isolation from influences that twist your will. You won't speak of this with the Chancellor. You won't ask advice from senators. You won't rely on friends who don't know the discipline of the Jedi." "Palpatine has been close to me," said Anakin, finally choosing to face the subject he'd avoided from the beginning. "He always shows himself understanding, speaks like someone who understands me more than any master, and sometimes I feel tempted to listen more than I should." And Windu didn't disguise his discomfort, responding like one wielding a verdict. "The Chancellor is a politician, and politicians negotiate souls when it suits them, so don't confuse him with a mentor, don't confuse him with a friend, and don't facilitate paths for his influence. For where courtesy ends, manipulation begins, and the price is usually collected when it's already too late." Anakin breathed through his mouth, seeking rhythm, and said he didn't want to be unfair, that the Chancellor had always shown support when the Council looked at him with reservations, and Windu interrupted, firmly, like one refusing sentimentalism. "Justice is not naivety, Skywalker, and trust is not eternal gratitude. What I ask of you is enough distance to see, because too much proximity produces blindness, And you're at the center of forces disputing the Republic's future. So you'll learn to refuse whispers that caress the ego to later chain the heart. And that phrase weighed more than any sermon Anakin had received. If I distance myself from him, I'll be more alone, confessed Anakin, with a trace of vulnerability he rarely allowed to appear. And what remains when night comes and the screams return? And Windu responded without softening. There remains discipline, there remains training, there remains truth observed with patience, because panic is a form of lie, and you'll learn to recognize it, and if what you saw is a shadow produced by foreign hands, we'll find them. And if it's a real line of the future, we'll cut it where possible, but only with lucidity, not with despair. In the interval between words, Coruscant seemed to vibrate beyond the window with the constant noise of a city that never sleeps, and Anakin, for the first time since the nightmares began, felt that someone was leading him out of the labyrinth, not out of pity, but by method, and this lit in him a hope that didn't depend on magical promises, so he asked, already seeking tasks, "What do you expect from me today?" And Windu responded, "That you rest enough not to confuse exhaustion with intuition, that you record with precision each detail of the visions, that you distance yourself from the Chancellor discreetly, and that tomorrow you return to me with a clear mind to receive orders." Anakin inclined his head in agreement and, before leaving, risked one more question, aware that he was treading on fragile ground. "Will you take this to the Council now?" And Windu held his gaze, calculating, weighing variables he didn't verbalize, and said, "I'll take what's necessary at the right time, because too much information, too soon, produces noise, and noise hinders the blade. So, for now, this stays between us, but remember, Skywalker, secrecy is not a license for recklessness. It's only the necessary silence to hear the truth when it arrives." Upon crossing the threshold, Anakin had the impulse to return and reveal the name he was hiding, the confession that burned. But he contained the gesture because he understood that the first test was obedience and precision, and that Windu would only support him if he saw in him a reliable soldier, and he walked down the corridor like one returning from the front with an embryonic plan, repeating to himself the firm lines he'd heard, while outside the Coruscant traffic drew spirals in the sky. And, for some reason he couldn't explain, these lines seemed less chaotic than the night before. At that same hour, Mace Windu remained alone in the room, facing the emptiness that remained between the chairs, and reflected on the audacity of accepting that secret as a direct mission. For he knew that betting on Skywalker was like wielding a double-edged sword, capable of opening a path or of wounding the very hand that holds it, and even so, he decided that the Force doesn't roll dice by chance, and that, if that young man came to him and not to Yoda, perhaps it was because, this time, the order needed action before bomb, and cut before consolation. On the way back, Anakin passed by the training room, where some Padawans practiced basic movements under Plo Koon's supervision, and for an instant he envied the simplicity of that stage, when the world still seemed divided into clear rights and wrongs, and when the Force was a gentle current, not a churning ocean of signs. But this nostalgia lasted little, because the weight of the vision pushed him forward, and he promised himself he would record every detail of the dreams, every inflection, a voice, every shadow, as Windu had asked, and that he would return at dawn with a report that could sustain actions. Upon reaching the outer terrace, he felt the hot wind rising from the docks and closed his eyes for a moment, not to flee, but to gather the new pieces he had received, and then he heard, in recent memory, the hard cadence of Mace saying that promises to save lives are hooks, and that politicians negotiate souls when it suits them, and these phrases, which would have sounded cruel in another context, now seemed like maps, and Anakin, finally, accepted that the path ahead would require less impulsive confession and more discipline, less shouting and more listening, less anger and more method, and this gave him a rare relief. Before leaving for his quarters, he looked at Coruscant's horizon and murmured, as if speaking to the Force itself, "I'm going to try the right way." And the answer that came wasn't a voice, nor a premonition, but a silence that didn't weigh, a silence that seemed like open space where something can be built, and Anakin clung to this sensation, because it was better than the despair that had been torturing him, and because now he had an ally whose respect is earned with results, and not with please, and he decided that, this time, he would arrive with results. When night finally gave way to the first lines of light, Anakin had already filled out a meticulous report with all the fragments of the dreams, and realized that, in describing them, the anguish lost strength, as if naming cut the invisible threads that pulled him toward the abyss, and he stored the report, certain that Windu would value precision, and, lying down for a brief moment, promised that, if new images came, he would receive them as data and not as whips, because now there was a plan, and plans opened doors where before there were only walls. Anakin returned to Windu's quarters with the report in hand. He had spent hours recording every detail of the nightmares. Windu received the document in silence, reading with surgical attention, his eyes traversing each line as if seeking flaws in a battlefield. When he finished, he raised his head and asked, without detours, "Who is this person who appears in your visions, Skywalker? You still haven't said the name." Anakin's heart beat harder, and for a moment he thought about inventing something, but Windu's gaze didn't allow lies. It was like being under the cut of an invisible saber. He took a deep breath and spoke, "It's Padme. She's not just someone I know in the Senate. She's my wife. We married in secret. I know I violated the code. I know I hid the truth, but I can't deny this. She's the reason I fight." The silence that followed was heavy. Windu didn't move nor show surprise. He only stared at him with intensity before saying, "You are the chosen one. Your position has never been simple. Now I understand the strength of your fears. If we took this to the council, many would ask for your expulsion. But this is not the time to further divide the order. For now, this secret stays with me." Anakin blinked, not believing that Windu would actually keep silent. "Why?" he asked in a low voice. "Because if the council knows, we won't see clarity, we'll see judgment. And judgment now is poison. What we need is rationality," responded Windu, crossing his arms. "And I'm going to give you that. You must abandon the emotional chains that drag you to the edge of the abyss. I want you to see this problem as a warrior sees a mission. Calculate, observe, plan. Not as a desperate man." The words fell upon Anakin like a weight that, paradoxically, gave him balance. Windu's implacable posture pushed him out of emotional chaos and forced him to think like a general, not like a distressed husband. "So you're not going to remove me?" he asked. "Not yet. I need to see how far you can go with discipline. If you fail, I myself will take your truth to the council. But until then, you'll follow my instructions." "Understood." Anakin nodded firmly. A few hours later, Anakin walked through marble corridors toward the great amphitheater where Chancellor Palpatine awaited him. The place was illuminated by golden light streaming through the windows, but Anakin didn't feel the same comfort as other times. Palpatine received him with a warm smile. "My young friend, I perceive a weight in your mind. Something troubles you. Would you like to tell me?" This was the moment when, in another timeline, Anakin would have poured out his fears and given opening to the poisonous seed of the Plagueis story. But now, what echoed in his mind was Windu's firm voice. "See like a warrior, not like someone distressed." Thus, Anakin took a deep breath and responded, "No, Chancellor, they're just common concerns of war. I'm fine." Palpatine tilted his head, slightly frustrated at not extracting anything. "You don't need to hide from me," insisted Palpatine, with that almost paternal tone that had so often seduced him. But Anakin held his gaze, firm as he'd learned from Windu. "It's nothing relevant. The war is ongoing, and the council demands discipline. I prefer to concentrate on that." Palpatine smiled, but his eyes betrayed disappointment. He realized that, somehow, Anakin was less vulnerable than before. This simple refusal changed everything. The Plagueis story would never be mentioned. The hook that Palpatine had cast in the original timeline found no place to snag Anakin's soul. And for the first time, the Chancellor felt he didn't have total dominion over the young Jedi. He still believed he could influence him, but the wall erected by Windu was already beginning to take effect. When he left the amphitheater, Anakin walked with a serenity he hadn't known for months. For the first time, he felt he had control over what he shared and to whom he owed loyalty. Windu's coldness, which before frightened him, now became a pillar of rationality. He still feared the future, still feared losing Padme, but no longer as a cornered prey. Now he thought like a soldier facing a mission. Find the truth and act. As he crossed Coruscant's corridors, he repeated in silence Windu's words, clarity before emotion, method before despair. And this newly acquired discipline changed the way he faced even Palpatine's looks. Where before he saw understanding, now he perceived calculation. Where before he saw friendship, now he felt manipulation. A thread of doubt was breaking, and in its place arose the perception that the true ally wasn't in the Senate, but within the Order, even in its hardest and most demanding form. Something fundamental had changed. The future was still uncertain, but a bifurcation had opened, and, this time, he wasn't alone with his fears. He carried Windu's coldness as an invisible weapon, capable of protecting his mind against whispers and promises. The war's board had been redrawn, and Palpatine, unknowingly, had lost his most precious move. The following days were marked by a strange calm. Anakin, now guided by Windu's coldness, kept himself distant from overly close conversations with Palpatine. But the Chancellor didn't give up. He noticed that his young protege no longer came to him seeking advice, and this irritated him. Thus, one night he called Anakin to his private office in the Senate. The place was empty, enveloped in shadows, only the lights of Coruscant City reflecting in the tall windows. The atmosphere had airs of conspiracy. Palpatine observed the horizon before speaking, with that low and honeyed voice he knew how to use. Anakin, you are different from all the Jedi I've ever known. You're stronger, more talented, more promising. The Order doesn't see your value, but I do. I can show you paths that no master would dare reveal. Knowledge that would make you the most powerful Jedi in history. The words fell like smooth poison, but what Palpatine didn't know was that Anakin was no longer so vulnerable to promises. The young Jedi maintained a firm countenance, remembering Windu's order, clarity before emotion. Still, the words of power stirred his ambition, poked at the pride of being called the Chosen One. What paths would those be, Chancellor? He asked, but without surrendering his heart. Palpatine smiled sideways. The paths of the dark side of the Force. With them, there would be no limits to what you could achieve. No council, no master, no enemy could stop you. You would become the very incarnation of the living Force. There was silence. Anakin felt temptation like fire on his skin, but Windu's cold voice echoed in his mind. Promises of power are invisible hooks. He stood slowly and said only, I need to think. He left the room with firm steps, leaving Palpatine with a frozen smile on his face. The Sith perceived that the trap wasn't working as before, but still believed that time would bring him back. Anakin, however, sought out Windu and reported every word, hiding nothing. Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith we've been looking for, he said with heavy breathing. He offered me unlimited power, the secrets of the dark side, not to save anyone, but to make me the most powerful Jedi in history. The words echoed in Windu's room like thunder. Mace showed no surprise. He only closed his eyes and responded, I always knew there was something wrong, but now we have proof. He no longer hides his claws. Anakin sat, still disturbed, and said, Master, we have to act. Now, every second that passes, Palpatine gains more influence. The Senate adores him, and he controls the war generals. We can't wait. Windu folded his hands, reflecting in silence. Do you understand the weight of this, Skywalker? If we fail, the Senate will see us as traitors. It will be us against the entire Republic. The Order could be destroyed. Anakin raised his eyes with a firmness that surprised even himself. If we don't act, the dark side will dominate everything. I won't let that happen. Take me with you. I won't stay out of this. In the original story, Windu would never accept. But here, he saw that Skywalker had transformed. He wasn't the unstable boy who let himself be dominated by emotions. The coldness borrowed from Windu's discipline had created a rational warrior. Very well, said the Master, standing up. If Palpatine is truly the Sith, we'll need all the power the Force can offer. And you, as the Chosen One, will be at my side. Anakin felt a wave of determination take hold of him. It was no longer a solitary fight against nightmares, but a declared war against the one who had manipulated the galaxy in the shadows. "I won't fail, Master," he said. Windu responded, seriously, "Don't promise me that. Just fight with me to the end." As they left the Jedi Temple together, both knew there was no return. Destiny was cast. And this time, the assault against Palpatine wouldn't be conducted only by Windu's implacable hand, but also by Anakin's burning force, now anchored in discipline and reason. The confrontation approached, and Coruscant's shadows awaited the clash that would forever change the galaxy's future. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor leading to the Chancellor's office. Windu walked ahead, firm as a blade. Anakin followed right behind, his hand resting on his saber, heart racing, but mind clear. The doors opened and revealed Palpatine seated in his chair, hands interlaced, as if already awaiting them. His eyes shone with a mix of pleasure and defiance. Windu raised his voice, solemn. "In the name of the Republic, you are under arrest, my lord." Palpatine didn't move. He only smiled coldly. "So this is how it is? 2 Jedi against the legitimate Chancellor? You've lost yourselves. But it's not too late yet, Anakin." He stood, the tone now more seductive, targeting the young knight. "You don't need to be just another Jedi, limited by mediocre rules. Together, we can rule the galaxy. I'll give you the power you've always sought. You'll be more than a warrior. You'll be order itself." Anakin felt temptation pulse, like a hot current trying to drag him, but he remembered the nights when Windu had forced him to reason and not yield to emotions. He raised his saber and said, firmly, "No, Chancellor, your time is over. Surrender." Windu advanced a step, reinforcing the order. "There will be no negotiation, Palpatine." The Sith's smile disappeared, and in a sudden movement, his red blade emerged, cutting the air with fury. Combat exploded in the hall. Winds and sparks spread with each exchanged blow. Palpatine advanced against Windu, with each thrust trying to open breaches, but it was Anakin who placed his saber forward, deflecting the attack. Windu stepped back, observing with attention. It was the moment he had never understood, the chosen one taking his place. The fight between Anakin and Palpatine set the chamber ablaze. The young Jedi moved with speed and vigor, each step marked by the dexterity of youth and the intensity of the Force. Palpatine counterattacked with experience, with the cunning of decades in the dark side. His strikes were precise and deadly, but his body no longer responded with the same agility. The blades collided with crashes, reflecting the imminent fall of an empire built in silence. Windu remained motionless, eyes fixed on the duel. It wasn't his fight, not anymore. He realized, with absolute clarity, that destiny had placed itself before Anakin. "The chosen one," he murmured to himself, accepting that this moment didn't belong to him. Palpatine retreated, pressed by Skywalker's fierce attacks. Each thrust brought him closer to defeat. Precise blow disarmed the Sith. His red saber flew across the room and disappeared through the broken window, falling into Coruscant's night. Palpatine, now on his knees, raised his hands and launched a sea of lightning at Anakin. Blue light illuminated the entire hall, burning the air and making the floor tremble. Windu prepared to intervene, but then saw something he would never expect. Anakin didn't raise his saber. He let the blade fall to the side and extended his bare hands. The Force flowed through him like an unstoppable river. He advanced step by step, deflecting and absorbing the energy. His face was firm, his expression serene, as if he had become a pure channel of the Force. With each step, Palpatine writhed, skin burning, face deforming until, finally, the lightning ceased. Gasping, Palpatine almost fainted, defeated, breathing irregular and eyes full of hatred. Anakin stared at him, then looked at Windu. "He must be judged, Master. Let the Republic know what he did." For a moment, there seemed to be hope that justice would prevail. But Windu took a step forward, his gaze hard as stone. "No, Skywalker. He's too dangerous to be left alive." Anakin's heart wavered, and then, in a single movement, quick and decisive, He raised his saber and cut off Palpatine's head, ending the fight definitively. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, but also liberating. Windu, still shocked by what he had witnessed, knew that destiny had been fulfilled. The prophecy, fulfilled it is, he murmured, his voice laden with reverence. There was no denying it. Anakin Skywalker had done what no other could. He had identified and destroyed the Sith Lord who threatened the galaxy. Not out of despair, not out of ambition, but by the clear and rational force he had learned to cultivate. Days later, the Jedi Council absolved Anakin of any transgression. They recognized in him the chosen one who brought balance to the Force, eliminating the dark enemy who had infiltrated the Republic's heart. The war came to an end, and a new era arose. Windu, though marked by the weight of decisions, knew he had taken the right path in trusting him. And Anakin, for the first time, felt at peace with his destiny. Thus, in the heart of Coruscant, not a tyrant was born, but a hero. The galaxy rose before a new dawn, and Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, finally walked upon the path that had always been his, now free from the chains of manipulation, bringing the balance that so many masters had awaited for generations.